Howdy, I'm Travis at Water's Edge Allen, and this is our summer short. It's kind of where we recap what we talked about last weekend, and that way if you're on vacation, you're traveling, or you just weren't able to be with us, you can get in a quick message, kind of the core of what we were talking about. So the real question we asked ourselves on Sunday was, how did they miss it? How did so many people, particularly religious people, miss who Jesus was when they were actually walking, talking, and breathing with Jesus? And what we see is this progression of stories when Mark is writing. The first thing that we saw last week was the simple conversation he had with Levi where he said, "Follow me." And Levi responded by leaving his job, his vocation at the time, and having a meal with Jesus and eating with him and following him. And then we are followed up with three consecutive stories that talk about the struggle that people were having. One had to deal with fasting and the fact that Jesus and his disciples didn't fast, but all the other religious leaders of the time did fast. Then the next story was about the Sabbath and what does it mean to keep the Sabbath. And Jesus talks about the Sabbath. Man was made for the Sabbath and not Sabbath for the man. And he kind of gives us insight saying, listen, this is my gift, my Father's gift to humanity, that I would sit down and say, take a break. I know how you're wired and I know you're going to work all the time, so take a break. But what you had done is made it a law, and you had put a bunch of rules and regulations on it. And then the final story that we unpacked was this moment where Jesus is in the temple, and it's on a Sunday again, the Sabbath. I should say, not the Sunday, it's on the Sabbath. And all the Pharisees and church leaders are just bating their breath, watching to see what he would do. There's a man there with a shriveled hand. He couldn't use his hands. And Jesus asked him to come forward. And as he asked him to come forward, immediately what happens is Jesus asks a simple question. He goes, so is it better to do good or to do evil on the Sabbath? Is it better to bring life or death on the Sabbath? And the Pharisees and the religious leaders, they couldn't answer. They missed it. And to prove to them that this question is a no-brainer question, it's always better to do good regardless of what day of the week it is. Jesus told the man to stretch out his hand, and he did, and he was healed. The tragedy of that story was this. Because the Pharisees and leaders of that day were so concerned about other things, they missed God healing someone in their midst. They missed it. And instead of rejoicing and celebrating that God had healed, they became frustrated and angry that it didn't happen on the right day or the right way. You know, we're guilty of that sometimes too. See, with those three stories back to back to back, what you see is people often miss it because they're following a person or a philosophy rather than trying to follow Jesus himself. That was the issue with the fasting. Jesus is saying, hey, when you have me with you, you don't need to fast. That's why my disciples aren't fasting, because I, God incarnate, are with them right here, right now. And so let's make sure that we're not following a person, we're not following a philosophy, but we are truly people who are following Jesus himself. The next thing is following traditions over following God. They had turned the Sabbath, rather than into this blessing of rest and relaxation and reconnecting to God, their Savior, they turned it into a tradition that they expected and demanded to be followed. And if it wasn't followed, then there was hell to be paid. And we can do that too in our churches, can't we? We can establish phenomenal traditions that have to be followed instead of realizing that the best traditions are only traditions that point to Jesus. And that if it no longer points to Jesus in our culture, then we need to find a new tradition. Finally, following wrong philosophies, wrong traditions, sometimes we can follow our wrong expectations. We can put God into a box and expect him to act on our way or in our time, instead of realizing that God is God and that our job is to look and see him work. And anywhere and everywhere he works, where there brings healing to the broken, where the injustice is overcome, where the loveless find love, where there's forgiveness proclaimed, and where there's grace that abounds, we celebrate it. Even if it looks different than what we thought it should, even if it happens at a different time than we think it should, we rejoice. So, may God be with you. And may you and I come to follow Jesus and Jesus alone, making sure that all that we do points to Him and not to us or to other things, and that we always keep our eyes open. And whenever we see Him move, we rejoice and celebrate. God bless. Have a great rest of the summer, and we'll see you next week.